The road stretched endlessly in front of me, swallowed by the darkness that only a lonely highway in the middle of nowhere could offer. My truck's headlights were barely enough to cut through the night, flickering in defiance of the void beyond them. I'd been driving for hours, my eyelids heavy despite the caffeine coursing through my veins. I was somewhere in the Midwest, one of those barren stretches where the land rolls flat for miles, and the only signs of life are the skeletal outlines of trees lining the horizon. There weren't many cars on the road, just the occasional glint of another truck's lights in the distance. The radio had long since lost its signal, leaving only the steady hum of the engine and the faint whisper of the wind against the cab. Then, I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, something faint and unmoving in the center of the road. I slowed down, my fingers tightening around the wheel. As I got closer, the shape took form. A car. A single vehicle parked dead in the middle of the highway, its hazard lights blinking sluggishly, barely cutting through the darkness. That wasn't what unsettled me, though. It was the fact that the driver's side door was wide open. I rolled to a stop a few yards away, my breath coming slow and measured. I wasn't the kind of guy to spook easily. 15 years on the road had taught me that most weird situations had some kind of rational explanation. Maybe a breakdown, maybe someone had wandered off for help. But something about this didn't sit right. I kept my engine running as I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached for the door handle. The night was eerily quiet when I stepped out. No wind, no rustling of trees, just an oppressive silence that clung to the air. Even the faint blinking of the hazard lights felt muted, as if the very atmosphere had swallowed the sound. The car was an older model, maybe a decade out of date but still in decent shape. I approached cautiously, glancing through the open door into the driver's seat. Empty. I frowned and took a step closer, leaning in to scan the interior. The keys were still in the ignition, dangling from the slot. The engine wasn't running. I checked the back seat, also empty. The upholstery was clean, no signs of a struggle. Just an abandoned vehicle left in the middle of a desolate road. I straightened up, rubbing the back of my neck as unease crawled over me. There was no sign of a wreck, no skid marks, no blood. Just nothing. The road was clear in every direction, stretching out into the void like an unfinished thought. That's when I heard it. A sound small, distant, but unmistakable. A voice. It was faint at first, drifting through the cold night air, but it sent a jolt through my spine. A whisper of something, just out of reach. Help me. The voice was soft, breathy, barely audible. I turned sharply, scanning the darkness beyond the road. The truck's headlights cast a long, shallow glow over the fields that lined either side, but beyond that, there was nothing but the deep black void of night. I took a step back toward my truck, my instincts screaming at me to leave. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. Then I saw the movement. A flicker of something shifting in the dark, just past the beams of my headlights. A figure? A shape? I couldn't tell, but my blood ran cold. Then the voice came again, clearer this time. Help me. It wasn't right. The tone was off, too hollow, too calculated, like someone forcing the words through clenched teeth. That was all I needed. I turned on my heel and strode back to my truck, forcing myself not to run. Running meant panic. Panic meant mistakes. I yanked the door open and climbed in, locking it behind me. My hands were on the wheel, my foot hovering over the gas. That's when the headlights flickered. A single stutter, just a blink, a momentary lapse, before steadying again. But in that fraction of a second, I saw them. Figures, standing just beyond the reach of the light. Dozens of them. Still, motionless. Watching. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I stomped on the gas, the truck lurching forward with a roar of the engine. The car in front of me was still blocking the road, but I didn't care. I gritted my teeth and swung around it, my tires screaming as I veered off onto the gravel shoulder. The figures didn't move, didn't chase. But as I passed them, I saw their faces. Blank, smooth, featureless. And every single one of them turned their heads in unison, following me as I sped past. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just kept driving, pushing my truck to speeds I knew weren't safe. It took nearly an hour before I let myself breathe again, the highway stretching endlessly before me. The night pressed heavy against my windows, but I didn't dare turn my lights off, because in the distance, far down the road, I could still see them. The figures were still there. Even though I was miles down the road, they hadn't disappeared. They hadn't moved, but they were still there, lingering at the very edges of my vision, no matter how many miles I put between us. I swallowed thickly, my hands white-knuckled around the steering wheel. The cab of my truck felt suffocating, like the darkness outside was pressing against the glass, trying to force its way in. I kept telling myself I was just tired. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a smear on my windshield, a hallucination born of exhaustion. But deep down, I knew better. I'd seen them. I kept my foot on the gas, refusing to let the speedometer dip below 70. The old truck rattled beneath me, the engine groaning in protest, but I didn't care. I just needed to put distance between me and whatever the hell that was. The road stretched on, an unbroken void ahead, flanked by the occasional dead tree or rusting mile marker. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, but it clung to me like oil on my skin. Then the radio crackled to life. A burst of static, sharp and violent, split through the silence. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My breath hitched as the noise fizzled and popped, shifting between white noise and something else. A voice. Help? My stomach turned to ice. I reached for the dial, fingers trembling as I twisted it off. The cab fell into silence again, save for the hum of the road beneath me. And then, the whisper came back. Not through the radio. From the sleeper cab behind me. I went rigid. My blood ran cold. Something was in my truck. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe evenly. My mind screamed at me to pull over, to throw the door open and run, but I knew better. I was on an empty stretch of highway, surrounded by nothing but miles of darkness. There was nowhere to go. Slowly, I reached for the small mirror mounted near the ceiling, tilting it ever so slightly to catch a glimpse of the sleeper cab behind me. At first, I saw nothing. Just the curtain, half drawn. The faint outlines of my gear. The same cluttered space I'd seen 100 times before. And then, movement. The curtain shifted. Not much. Just an inch, maybe two. A breath of motion, as if someone was hiding behind it, watching me. I gripped the wheel tighter, my heart pounding against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to act, to do something, but my limbs were locked in place, paralyzed by the weight of pure, unfiltered terror. I wasn't alone. And then, the whisper came again. Help me. My vision tunneled. The road blurred. My knuckles ached from how hard I was gripping the wheel. I had to act. Now. With a surge of desperation, I slammed on the brakes. The truck lurched forward, tires shrieking against the asphalt. The momentum sent me jolting forward against my seatbelt, my skull cracking against the headrest. But that wasn't what I was focused on. The curtain behind me ripped open. Something lunged forward. I didn't see its face, only a flash of movement, a shadow spilling into the cab with unnatural speed. A cold, suffocating presence filled the air, thick and cloying, like the weight of 1,000 unseen hands pressing against my skin. I threw the door open and launched myself out of the truck. My boots skidded against the pavement as I hit the ground hard, my palms scraping against the rough asphalt. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The truck idled in front of me, its headlights throwing long, stretched shadows across the road. The cab door hung open, swinging slightly in the breeze. And then, a hand emerged from the darkness inside. Thin. Wrong. Its fingers were too long, its joints bending at unnatural angles as it gripped the edge of the door frame. The skin, if it could even be called that, was waxy and stretched too tight, like a mannequin left in the sun too long. It pulled itself forward. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I just ran. The wind howled in my ears, the pounding of my boots against the road merging with the rapid thud of my heartbeat. The darkness stretched in every direction, an unbroken void, but I didn't care. Anything was better than facing whatever the hell was in that truck. Behind me, I heard the sound of metal buckling, the screech of something massive shifting. A deep, guttural clicking noise filled the air. I kept running. I don't know how far I went. I don't know how long I sprinted down that empty highway, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. But eventually, the exhaustion caught up with me. I stumbled to a stop, doubling over as I gasped for breath. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling to unlock the screen. No signal. Of course. I turned back, my chest still heaving. The truck was barely visible in the distance, its headlights still glowing faintly against the night. And standing just beside it, silhouetted against the glare, was a figure. Tall. Still. Waiting. I don't remember much after that. Just the overwhelming feeling of something crawling beneath my skin, an indescribable wrongness that made my vision blur and my thoughts fracture. I kept walking, not knowing where I was going. I walked until the sun started creeping over the horizon, painting the sky in pale hues of orange and gray. And when I finally reached a gas station, finally stumbled inside, breathless and wild-eyed, The clerk took one look at me and went pale. You came from the highway?" he asked, voice low. I nodded, still gasping for air. He swallowed hard, glancing toward the window, as if afraid of what might be outside. "You're lucky," he muttered. "Most people who see it, they don't make it out." A chill ran down my spine. I never went back for the truck. I never filed a report. I just kept driving, moving from job to job, never staying on the same route for too long. But every now and then, when I find myself on an empty road late at night, I see them, standing at the edge of the headlights, waiting. And I know, deep in my bones, that one day, they'll be waiting for me. Story 2. The storm had rolled in without warning. 1 minute, the highway had been bathed in the dull orange glow of a distant truck stop, the neon lights flickering against the wet asphalt. The next, I was swallowed whole by the black maw of a thunderstorm. My wipers struggled against the downpour, the rain coming down in thick, slanted sheets. Visibility was nearly gone, just a few feet of road illuminated by my high beams before the world dissolved into darkness. I clenched the wheel tighter, my knuckles aching from the strain. I'd been driving long enough to know when to pull over, but there was nowhere to stop. No shoulder, no rest area, just an endless stretch of road cutting through the trees on either side. I wasn't alone, though. A pair of taillights glowed dimly ahead, bobbing slightly as the vehicle navigated the wet pavement. Another trucker, just as determined, or just as stupid, as me. I kept my distance, watching the red glow like a lifeline in the storm. Then, without warning, the taillights vanished. My heart jumped into my throat. 1 second, they were there, guiding me through the rain. The next, they had simply disappeared. I eased off the gas, my pulse hammering in my ears. No skid marks, no sign of impact, just an empty road ahead, slick and glistening under the weak beams of my headlights. I swallowed hard, scanning the highway for any sign of movement. Then, just barely visible through the rain, I saw it. A figure, standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes. The truck shuddered, tires skidding against the wet asphalt. The figure didn't move, just stood there, hunched and unnatural, its outline distorted by the rain. I squinted through the windshield, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Something was wrong. It wasn't right. The proportions were off, its limbs too long, its stance too stiff. And then, its head snapped toward me. A cold, sinking dread settled in my gut. I didn't wait. I threw the truck into gear and swerved around it, my tires shrieking as I sped past. For the briefest moment, my headlights swept across the figure, and I saw its face. Or rather, I saw the lack of one. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin stretched too tight over a skull-like shape. Then it was gone, swallowed by the storm. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just kept driving, the road stretching endlessly ahead, the rain pounding against the windshield like frantic, desperate fingers. And somewhere in the distance, barely audible over the storm, I swore I heard laughter. I didn't slow down, not for a second. The storm howled around me, battering the truck with a fury that rattled my bones. But it wasn't the wind or the rain that had my pulse hammering. It was the thing I had seen, or thought I'd seen. I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion messing with my head. A trick of the rain, a reflection. But no amount of logic could erase what I'd felt, the pure, animalistic dread that had wrapped itself around my ribs like a vice. The laughter still echoed in my ears, even though I knew it wasn't real. It couldn't be. I drove for what felt like hours, my muscles locked, my eyes darting constantly between the road and my mirrors. The storm began to ease, the rain tapering off into a steady drizzle. That's when I saw the lights again, the same taillights that had disappeared before. I slowed, my mouth going dry. They were up ahead, flickering through the mist, moving at a steady pace. Not erratic, not damaged, just driving, like nothing had ever happened. I should have been relieved, but my gut twisted. Something about them felt wrong. I crept closer, keeping a safe distance. The truck in front of me looked identical to the one I had been following earlier. Same size, same make, same slow, deliberate speed. But something gnawed at the edges of my mind. A whisper of unease, growing louder with each mile. Then, the CB radio crackled. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Static buzzed through the speaker, sharp and distorted. I hadn't touched the dial, hadn't even turned it on. Then a voice cut through the static. Low, gravelly, wrong. Keep following. The words sent a spike of cold fear down my spine. I reached for the radio, ready to switch it off, but before I could, the voice spoke again. "You're almost there." A wave of nausea rolled through me. Almost where? I slammed my hand down on the radio, killing the sound. My breaths came fast and shallow. The truck ahead of me kept moving, steady, unwavering. The road stretched on, curving through the trees. The mist thickened. The air felt heavier. Wrong. Then, up ahead, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. A second pair of taillights. And a third. One after another, identical trucks, all moving at the exact same speed, disappearing into the fog ahead. My stomach twisted. This wasn't normal. This wasn't real. I gritted my teeth and yanked the wheel hard, pulling into the oncoming lane. My tires skidded on the wet road as I gunned it, pushing past the convoy of trucks. As I passed the first one, I caught a glimpse of the driver's seat. It was empty. No driver. No movement. Just a hollow, lifeless shell, rolling steadily forward as if pulled by some unseen force. Panic surged through me. I sped past the second truck. Then the third. My heart pounded against my ribs. The moment I cleared the last truck, the CB radio blared back to life. "You shouldn't have done that." The voice was closer now. Louder. I killed the radio again, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. Then, in the mirror, I saw them. Figures. Sitting in the trucks now. Their heads twisted at unnatural angles, their blank, smooth faces turned toward me. Watching. I stepped on the gas. The trucks behind me sped up. I didn't look back again. I didn't slow down. I just drove. I drove until the mist cleared, until the sun finally began to rise, washing the sky in pale hues of orange and gray. And when I finally dared to check my mirrors again, the road behind me was empty. No trucks. No taillights. Nothing. I pulled into a rest stop at sunrise, my hands still trembling as I shut off the engine. I sat there for a long time, trying to convince myself I had imagined it all. But as I reached for my CB radio, my stomach turned. The dial had been ripped off and scratched into the plastic. "You were almost there." I never took that route again. Story 3. I've been driving trucks for nearly 15 years. In that time, I've seen just about everything the road has to offer. Drunks stumbling onto highways, strange hitchhikers with empty eyes, even a deer that kept running alongside my rig for nearly 10 miles, like it was guiding me somewhere. But nothing has ever come close to what happened to me on Route 717. It was supposed to be a simple haul. Pick up a load of construction materials in a town I'd never heard of and deliver it 3 states over. The kind of job I could do in my sleep. I should have known something was wrong the moment I took the exit onto 717. The road was too quiet. No streetlights. No traffic. Just an endless stretch of cracked pavement, swallowed by thick forest on either side. My GPS flickered for a second before recalibrating, the voice robotic and distorted. Continue straight for 76 miles. I adjusted in my seat, rolling my shoulders to shake off the unease settling in my chest. It was just another back road. Nothing to worry about. Then I saw the sign. It was old, faded, and leaning at an odd angle. The paint had long since peeled away, but I could just barely make out the words beneath the rust. "No stopping after dark." I frowned. That was odd. I'd seen signs warning of falling rocks, deer crossings, even runaway truck ramps. But this? I drove on, the feeling in my gut twisting tighter with each mile. The sun had dipped below the horizon now, the trees casting long, skeletal shadows across the road. My headlights flickered, struggling against the encroaching darkness. Then I saw it. A woman, standing dead center in the road. I slammed the brakes, the truck lurching violently as my tires screeched against the pavement. My heart pounded as I gripped the wheel, my breath caught in my throat. She didn't move, just stood there, her body too still, her long hair hanging over her face in tangled strands. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. She wasn't right. Her arms were hanging at odd angles, her fingers slightly curled, like she'd forgotten how to use them. Her clothes were tattered, barely clinging to her thin frame. And then, she twitched. Not a normal twitch. Too sharp. Too sudden. Like a puppet whose strings had just been yanked. I swallowed hard, every instinct in my body screaming at me to put my foot back on the gas. But before I could move, her head snapped up, and I saw her eyes. Or rather, I didn't. Her face was smooth, her skin stretching over empty sockets where eyes should have been. A sound escaped her lips. A whisper, barely audible over the hum of my truck's engine. "Help me." The words were hollow, Wrong. I threw the truck into reverse, my pulse slamming in my ears. But the moment I moved, she screamed. A high, ragged, inhuman wail that rattled the windows and made my vision blur at the edges. And then, the forest moved. The trees lining the road shifted, their shadows spilling out onto the pavement, twisting, stretching, reaching. More figures emerged from the darkness, one by one. Pale, faceless shapes crawling onto the road, their limbs bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. They didn't run. They didn't speak. They just watched, waiting. The woman took a step toward me, her jaw unhinging in a way that sent a bolt of pure, primal terror through me. That was all I needed. I slammed my foot on the gas. The truck roared to life, the tires shrieking as I shot forward. For a split second, I saw her launch. And then, impact. The truck hit her full force, her body snapping backward like a rag doll as she disappeared beneath my wheels. I didn't stop, didn't check the mirrors. I just kept driving. The road stretched ahead, endless and suffocating, the darkness pressing in from all sides. And then, somewhere behind me, through the wail of the wind and the roar of my engine, I heard it. The laughter. The laughter didn't stop. It wasn't loud. It wasn't forced. It was wrong, a whispering, gurgling sound that seemed to slip through the cracks of the night, threading itself into the hum of my engine, the static of my radio, the very air inside the cab. I kept my foot on the gas, my hands locked tight around the wheel. I wasn't sure how long I'd been driving. 5 minutes? 10? An hour? The road ahead stretched endlessly, the same cracked pavement, the same looming trees. My headlights cut through the dark, but the shadows felt deeper now, as if something was pushing in from the edges. And then, my headlights flickered. Once. Twice. Then, they died. Everything went black. A cold, suffocating dread slammed into my chest. I hit the switch frantically. Nothing. I was blind, my truck rolling forward into absolute void. Then, a face appeared in the windshield. White. Smooth. Featureless. Right there, pressed against the glass, as if it had been waiting. I screamed, my hand slamming against the wheel as I instinctively swerved. The truck lurched, tires screeching against the road as I fought to regain control. The moment I looked back at the windshield, the face was gone. I gasped for breath, my chest heaving, my body shaking with adrenaline. My headlights flickered back on. The road ahead was clear. No figures. No laughter. Nothing. For a moment, I thought it was over. And then, my CB radio crackled. A burst of static, sharp and jagged. Then, a voice. You're not supposed to be here. I felt my stomach drop. The voice wasn't human. It was layered, too many voices speaking at once, overlapping, twisting, warping in and out of tone. Some low, guttural. Others high, breathy, almost childlike. The hair on my arms stood on end. I didn't respond. The static grew louder, filling the cab like a swarm of insects. I reached for the dial, my fingers trembling. Then, the voice changed. It became mine. Why did you stop? My own voice, coming through the radio. Cold. Flat. Wrong. I nearly threw up. I yanked the cord, ripping the CB radio from its socket. The static stopped. Silence. But it didn't feel empty. I could still feel it. Something was watching me. I kept driving. The road stretched ahead, the cracks in the pavement looking deeper now, like gaping mouths trying to swallow the asphalt whole. The trees were taller, their branches stretching out like hands, reaching. I blinked hard, trying to shake the exhaustion creeping into my bones. I just needed to get out. Then, I saw the sign. Another old, rusted road sign, barely clinging to the post it was bolted to. I squinted. The words were smeared, faded, barely legible, but I could still make them out. You can't leave. A shudder ran through me. I pressed the gas harder, willing my truck to move faster. Then, the road ended. I had looped back to where I started. The same mile marker. The same leaning NO stopping after dark sign. The same cracked pavement stretching ahead like an endless, rotting spine. My mouth went dry. I had been driving for hours. I had never turned around. But I was back. I slammed my fists against the wheel, panic clawing up my throat. This wasn't possible. I took a slow, shuddering breath, trying to steady my thoughts. I needed a new plan. I reached for my phone. No service. I wasn't surprised. My fingers drummed against the dashboard, my mind racing. I couldn't just sit here. I had to do something. Then, a light appeared behind me. Bright. Blinding. A single set of headlights, too high off the ground to be a regular car. A truck. Another trucker. Relief surged through me. I honked my horn, flashing my hazards, signaling for them to stop. The truck slowed. My heart pounded as I watched the massive vehicle roll to a stop a few yards behind me. The cab door opened. A man climbed out. Tall, broad, wearing a cap pulled low over his face. His boots crunched against the pavement as he stepped forward, his movement slow, deliberate. I exhaled sharply, my body still shaking. "Jesus, man," I called out, stepping onto the road. I think I'm lost. The man tilted his head. The moment his face entered the light, my stomach dropped. It was mine, my own face staring back at me. Expressionless. Blank. Wrong. I stumbled backward, my vision blurring with terror. The man took another step forward. His lips curled into a smile. The first real emotion I'd seen on him. And then he spoke. "Keep driving." His voice wasn't mine. It wasn't human. I ran. I jumped back into my truck, slamming the door shut and flooring the gas pedal. The headlights behind me vanished. The road ahead stretched into darkness, twisting, swallowing me whole. But I didn't stop. I drove. I drove until the world faded, until the road no longer made sense, until the trees became too tall, until the shadows reached for me. And somewhere in the distance, I heard the laughter again, growing closer. I don't know how I got out. I don't know if I ever really did. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving a quiet stretch of road, I'll check my mirrors, and I'll see the headlights, waiting, following. And I know, deep in my bones, I was never supposed to leave.